This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you in association with Bayer Crop Science.
This is the year in which the first big real cutting of the delinked payment was made. So you've got a very sharp reduction, poor yields, low prices, higher variable costs, I suspect, and the closure of SFI. So almost everything has conspired against cereal farmers.
UK cereal farmers earn less than the minimum wage, why environmental payments aren't delivering for growers and livestock producers, and Reform leader Nigel Farage is under fire after saying we shouldn't worry about cheap imports of chlorinated chicken. Welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. I'm Johann.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh. Broom.
Lots to get through this week, and we start with our top story. High input costs, low commodity prices and changes to farm support mean many farmers are now earning less than the minimum wage. Farm incomes fell by a huge 66% to just £17,000 for cereal growers last year. That's according to figures from the latest Farm Business Survey. General cropping farms have seen incomes halve, and pig farm incomes are 41% lower. It's a better picture for lowland grazing livestock, where incomes are 9% higher and dairy farmers are showing a 45% rise. Now, these are provisional figures for the year 2025-26, much of it before the impact of recent milk price drops. We're going to take a deep dive into the numbers in just a minute, including those disastrously low combinable crop incomes, less than the minimum wage. But first, we're joined by Sally Pocock, head of the Farm Business Survey for England. Sally, put this survey into some kind of context for us.
So the survey is conducted by our research officers that go out on farm and collect financial and physical data from a selection of farmers across England, all sectors, all sizes, and across a variety of regions. We collect around 1,600 data sets on an annual basis. So we work directly with those farmers, sitting at their coffee tables or in their office, gathering all that information. And a lot of those farmers we see year on year, and that's probably one of the main powerful things about this survey, is that it's really robust. So every farmer that takes part in the FBS Farm Business Survey is helping shape the future of their sectors.
It's an annual survey. It's been going for 90 years. It's commissioned by the government, and the results are used to formulate farm policy.
So the results are used in all kinds of things. Primarily, DEFRA use FBS data to produce a range of official statistics. Probably the most well-known of that is the farm business income figures. And it's also used to spot trends. So the information and the data itself contributes towards shaping policy, supporting our industry organisations, carrying out that meaningful economic analysis, looking at the benchmark performance across sectors, and also provides clarity during periods of change or real uncertainty.
And we are, of course, going through a period of huge change at the minute. Important to point out that these are provisional figures. The final figures will be released later on this year. But overall, this is a snapshot picture of the state of the industry, but also we're able to identify longer-term trends.
Absolutely. Having such a robust set of data, as we said, it's 90 years this year, and being one of the longest running agricultural surveys in the world, we've been able to utilise that to spot those trends throughout those years. If people are really interested in having a look for themselves, you can visit the FBS website, so the Farm Business Survey website, and there's a data dashboard in there, and you can have a look at all kinds of data that is publicly available. As I said, the information from our direct farmers is anonymised so that no one can be identified through that information. The information goes back to 2005, 2006, so 20 years worth is sitting there to have a look at.
That's Sally Pocock from the Farm Business Survey. We'll put a link to the survey in the show notes page of this episode. Sally highlighting the importance of these very stark figures. And to take a deep dive into the numbers right now, we're joined by Jeremy Moody, Advisor and Secretary to the Central Association of Agricultural Valuers. Jeremy, welcome to the Farmers Weekly podcast. These farm income figures, up horn, down corn, to coin a phrase, better for livestock than for arable.
That's very much my reading of it. If we look at it over the years, and indeed the factors within the year, we have got, I think, with long run, the highest or almost the highest figures for grazing livestock, the highest for lowland livestock, and the second highest in 20 years for LFA livestock. I think we're seeing the effect of the very tight beef market with very strong prices. While at the other end, we're looking at the difficulties of arable cropping, particularly in cereals, with a dry year following, for many people, following 2 wet years, with the strong impact, which doesn't show up in the livestock figures, of the near removal of delinked payments. A variety of other factors coming through, but for cereals, it is the lowest figure in this data run since 2004. So it is a remarkably low figure there. And I think that illustrates the strain from people who've had those 2 wet years, followed by a dry year, punishing economics now for 3 years on their accounts.
I mean, that cereal figure down by 66% to £17,000 at a generous £170 per tonne for wheat. That's 100 tonnes of wheat. That's nothing at all, is it?
It looks horribly tight on this, but it's the decline year on year. And as I said, if you go right back to before 2007, when wheat was £60 a tonne, this is still lower than the figures we were achieving in 2004, 5, 6. And that's, I think, even before you start considering inflation. So this is a really quite remarkable figure and points to, I think, to quite significant cash flow pressures as we go into this coming autumn.
Does it also illustrate a high reliance in previous years on the basic payment? I mean, you talked about delinked payments.
Well, this is the year, all this is a modelling that DEFRA have done for the year in which the first big real cutting of the delinked payment was made, when it was cut by 3/4 for anybody getting less than 30,000, and anything above 30,000 was simply removed. So you've got a very sharp reduction. That has an important impact on both cereals and equally on grazing livestock farms as broadacre uses, but the evident strength of livestock prices has more than countered that for the grazing livestock farms, but it has compounded poor yields, low prices, higher variable costs, I suspect, and indeed, of course, also for some in that the closure of SFI, which was abruptly closed for applications back in March, really at the start of this accounting period. So almost everything has conspired against those cereal farmers.
Well, if we look at pig farms, they're also down at 41% lower at £75,000. We sometimes get accused on Farmers Weekly podcast of not doing enough on pigs, but this is a bad figure for pigs as well.
Yeah, but pigs have been volatile over the period, the notorious pig cycle. And if we look at that, it is still above where it was 3 years ago on those figures. But pigs in a sense go up and go down. What is equally interesting here is this is the first year they've not published figures for poultry or for horticulture. They just found their sample size was too small. And I think that again begs a number of questions about relying too hard on any of these figures. But we are looking at these pig figures being much stronger than they were 20 years ago, just looking very briefly through the data run. But they are down on some strong figures in very recent years. So I think pig farmers, historically unsupported, are more used to this, but it is down. They will benefit from the lower prices in cereals. But it for those who have according to the figures here, 22.3 was 72,500, then it went to 134,000, back a little to 125, and now down to 75. That shows the tide of business, and it has been a less comfortable year for them.
There are lots of sort of peaks and troughs here. If we look at a big peak, dairy farms expected to increase their farm business income by 45% to, well, almost £250,000. That will probably come as a surprise to milk producers who have seen their prices per litre drop over the last 6 months.
Yeah, parts of this reflect, of course, the combination between output and price. This is for the full year, really running March 25 to February 26. So these are lagging figures, and clearly are expected on current milk prices, if they continue, to be markedly poorer in the year we're now in, which is not the year that they're modelling here. So it is inevitably looking back, even though these are quite recent figures. But they've had a strong figure in dairying on that one. A bit higher, about as high as it was in 22. It dipped for 23. It rose for 24, and then rose again for the year just gone. But they are, again, feeling the pressure of cost at the moment.
So where do we go from here then? Overall, in the longer term, what is this telling us as an industry? And more to the point, what is it telling DEFRA? What is the situation here?
I think what we're looking at here is the prospect that the kind of change, the pressures for change that you and I have talked about over recent years are now really crystallising for a lot of broadacre farmers. Ceres, as the advisory firm, will tell us that we now have higher variable costs for cereals farming than many of our competitors, because classically the argument is to always look at fixed costs, but variable costs need some attention there. This is before the final cut to the delinked payment announced in June, but relevant to this year and next, which basically means that the payments in these 2 years are going to be about the size of the pensioners' winter fuel allowance. That will hit the cereals figure further. We're not yet seeing an uplift in prices, but we are clearly concerned as to where we might be with fertiliser and diesel prices, however the Gulf War consequences may settle out. The beef market appears very solid at the moment. It's hard to have the kind of rapid expansion of production that you can have in the pig sector. Markets are tightening, and now we've opened up successful trade into the United States, because I understand we are now delivering on the 13,000-tonne tariff-free quota, which will help strengthen beef prices here. Dairy, we do wait to see where they're going, but they have been used more to this cycle. But the real pressure is on the arable side here, a lot of it driven by difficult, very variable and differing extreme weathers that we've had. But general cropping here has got the lowest output and the poorest income figure here. So this is people with potatoes and sugar beet and so on. This is the poorest figure since 2014 for that sector. And it's one with much higher levels of working capital and exposure, again, to risk on that, for which there is not evidently matching reward. So I think the arable side may well now be going through quite a considerable need to consider its business structure, its approaches. I have heard of some people giving up Agricultural Holdings Act tenancies. We are, I think, looking at now those pressures for change really beginning to bite after what have been 3 quite difficult years for many people, particularly in southern and eastern England, and this year's outturn that's forecast here, which is recognisable. It's a model, but it's recognisable, will, I think, focus many minds on what they now might want to do next outside direct payments, facing the prices they're still facing. The current price now would go back 10 years, would have been £120 a tonne. We talk too easily about cash. Looking at the real value, we've been losing ground as cash prices have been level in the last couple of years. So a lot of change, I think, to come.
And can you give us any good news going forward? Are there any positives to take out of this?
Well, I think you can look at the grazing livestock side and feel really quite positive. And I think they should be using these years to consider their businesses so that they are in better shape as and when markets turn, whether it's because consumers turn to chicken or indeed beef supply improves somewhere else in the world. They're being given a good time in which to look at their costs and business structures and to think what they're going to do. On the arable side, I think it is now recognizing that people have had businesses for 30 years that have been built around a structure of significant area payments. And that has now gone at a time when the economics of the business are also significantly adverse. And that drives a background also prompted by the challenge of the inheritance tax changes for them really to think about what is the business model that works for the future. Prices here are set in world markets. We can't do very much about that. But it's understanding how we think about what we're cropping, where we're cropping, and how we're doing that. There may be a short-term uplift from the Gulf in looking at oilseeds, if there's more of a market for biofuels, as we understand where that's going. But everything out of the Gulf is too uncertain and too early to call, looking at the impact of the disruption there. But it's beginning to look as though it will linger longer, perhaps, than the American president might have hoped.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now for a special message from this week's podcast partner, Bayer Crop Science, where I'm joined by Matt Siggs. So Matt, spring spray program's just around the corner. Let's talk about Bayer Crop Science's fungicide, which is going to make our lives easier this season.
That's right. If you're managing a cereals program, you know how complicated fungicide mixtures can get. So we've got Plaxium to cut right through that. It combines different active substances to help you fight diseases, promote crop health, and most importantly, protect your yield.
So let's look at what's inside then. Plaxium mixes 3 heavy hitters.
Yes, it includes actives Iblon, fluopyram, and prothioconazole. Now, the real magic here is that it uses multiple modes of action, specifically 2 SDHIs and a DMI inhibitor, to give robust control, but also sound resistance management. Think of it like a 1-2 punch.
And by hitting diseases from these different angles, it makes it harder for them to build up any resistance.
Region and timing play a part, but Plaxium allows you to be flexible in your approach, as it is truly a broad spectrum fungicide, which can be delivered either at T1 or T2 in the week programme, depending on what you need to prioritise.
Now, I've had a look and it looks like it's great against septoria, but not only that, it's also effective on yellow and brown rust.
Yes, Plaxium's usability fits perfectly at T1, covering septoria, yellow rust and stem-based diseases, while also performing strongly at T2, particularly where brown rust might be a concern.
And you've got some more good news too, Matt.
Correct. Unlike a lot of treatments that force you into a strict rotation, you can use all Iblon formulations, including Plaxium, in the same field year after year, as long as it's on an approved crop. It's just a reliable, repeatable solution for protecting your yield potential against those key diseases season after season.
Matt Siggs from Bayer Crop Science, thank you.
Use plant protection products safely by reading the label and following all the safety precautions. For more information, visit our website cropscience.bayer.co.uk or speak to your local contact.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
Now, a blunt challenge from MPs to Natural England, the government's landscape agency. At a hearing of the House of Commons Environment, Food and Rural Affairs Committee, EFRACOM Chairman Alistair Carmichael MP questioned whether the government's new environmental funding system is actually delivering meaningful income for farmers.
And they're seeing a situation where they are being expected to deliver environmental goods. They're not getting any public help for food production. They're getting told that private money will come for that. It's not happening though.
That's EFRA Committee Chairman Alistair Carmichael. Under post-Brexit government policy, of course, direct farm payments are being phased out in England and replaced with payments for environmental work and private investment in nature markets. But Natural England Interim Chief Executive Marion Spain admitted those markets are still developing.
What we see happening in reality at the moment is twofold. We've touched on one. We see that for good reasons, smaller farmers are not yet confident to participate in private markets because those private markets are still very young. In terms of participation in agro-environment schemes, what we are seeing is farmers do not yet have all the information to make the decisions they need to make. They are still not. We have had more information released by government about SFI, but when we are talking to farmers on the ground, they are still not sure which is the best scheme to go into because they can't yet see the choices. So there is quite a lot of uncertainty for farmers at the moment. And that, I think, is probably the thing that worries me most, is that we need farmers to participate in nature recovery for the sake of food security, for the sake of their businesses.
That's Marion Spain of Natural England. Now, environmental markets, including biodiversity net gain and carbon payments, are supposed to bring private investment into farming. Developers or companies buy environmental credits from land managers who create habitats, store carbon or improve water quality. But MPs warned that many farmers are still struggling to navigate the new system, and some say they're being asked to deliver environmental benefits without clear financial returns. MP Terry Jeremy.
I think it was alluded to that maybe Natural England isn't always at the top of the Christmas card list for farmers. So why do you think there's been such a breakdown in trust with the farming community?
That question from MP Terry Jeremy directed at Natural England Chairman Tony Juniper, who had the following response.
I think sometimes, there is a conflation between government and Natural England. We are a government agency. When we arrive in the landscape, sometimes I think dissatisfaction about the uncertainty with schemes that have been talked about for years. Some of that criticism blows back on us because we're the actual people that the farmers are meeting rather than the policymakers who are still making those decisions, which are complicated and which do take time to get right. However, that frustration comes to us in a way which I think doesn't necessarily reflect the role that we have in all of this. And that, I think, would explain some of what the reported kind of reputation is amongst the farming community. But I would say that it's mixed. And, we are aware of where some people have been unhappy. But also I can cite many cases of where people have been very pleased with the assistance they've had from Natural England.
Natural England Chairman Tony Juniper arguing that some of the frustration is directed at the wrong place, saying many of the policies farmers struggle with, including environmental schemes and market design, are set by government. But it's Natural England that's usually the organisation farmers encounter on the ground. Later in the hearing, EFRA Committee Chairman Alistair Carmichael pressed Tony Juniper on a deeper question still.
You said that at the end of the day you come back to your guiding function, which is environmental. Is that not the root of the problem here?
That's Alistair Carmichael, and again that question was answered by Tony Juniper.
You could say it's the heart of the problem. You could also say it's the heart of the opportunity in being able to draw things together which appear to be in conflict and to find the synergies between them rather than the trade-offs.
That's Tony Juniper from Natural England, and that exchange really captures the tension running through the whole session. Natural England's legal role is to protect the environment, but government ministers also want Natural England to support economic growth, including farming, housing and infrastructure. And as the transition away from traditional farm support continues, the question of how farmers are paid for environmental work is likely to remain at the centre of the policy debate. Louise, Hugh, it's clear from what we've heard that MPs recognise the difficulties farmers are having in getting money from private companies to do environmental work, and yet at the same time, many farmers don't have the information they need to make an informed decision about joining one of the government's own environmental schemes.
Yeah, it's quite limited, the uptake, isn't it? It seems to be, I think, where you are seeing it coming onto farm, whether it's, the one that springs to mind for me is the BNG opportunity, which some farms have taken up. And obviously you've got to be an owner-occupier, number one, or have a very sympathetic landlord that's happy for you to tie something up for 30 odd years. Pretty unlikely to, well, you may find that in some old type tenancies. Yeah, it's really limited, and it's still very confusing for many people. And I think the key thing as well that he really talks about here, and you hear in the conversation, it's the BNG is one area, but there's lots of other areas where the sort of vision, the post-Brexit vision of farm support and agri-environment support was, it'll be a partnership between government and industry and other sectors of industry that need to offset scope 3 and support green things and do all that. And I think one of the biggest reasons that scope 3 or the private money hasn't rushed in as fast as they thought it might do is several things. One is just the government flip-floppery, which is any rural support policy, which we know is absolute been chaos since 2016. And also the fact that the whole benchmarking system around what's hot and what's not for the environment, whether that's around farm emissions, around biodiversity, however you want to apply metrics to what goes on in the countryside, is also absolute BS. I mean, it's just in utter confusion. There is no one-stop shop for farm metrics, environmental metrics, other than using relatively out-of-date CO2 emission figures, which were collated by a PhD in 2001 in Wyoming. It's a real mess. And as a result, some of the people have gone in, I suppose, and taken the top dollar where they can, if they're lucky enough to own a lovely big estate and they can sort of rewild it or not do a lot of farming, sit on their backsides and BNG the whole thing. But for most production farmers, there is little or no opportunity.
And Louise, Marion Spain and Tony Juniper from Natural England very much pointing out that Natural England is the implementer of government policy, not the deviser of policy. There is this frustration, you could almost sense it, that they are taking the flak at farm level for government policies that farmers feel just aren't delivering on the ground.
Yeah, I mean, they did admit, didn't they, that these markets aren't really working. But of course, we do have to remember, I think, that it is still early days. There were, a few things. Well, there still are a few things that are holding them up. I mean, one of them is that, of course, that they are linked to our planning system. And as we know, the planning system in this country hasn't been working for a while, and it is currently being overhauled. So that will have delayed things and set things back a bit. And the other thing which we were waiting as well on HMRC because they needed to clarify the tax position certainly with some of these BNG deals. And I know that was a long time coming through. But, there are deals being done, and I have been out to a few locations where they are doing BNG. And I got a bit of an update this week because I attended a natural capital event, which was very well organised, actually. It was local to where I am. And one of the questions that was asked at that event was whether BNG was actually working. Well, the figures that came back, that over 31,000 of these biodiversity units, which are the things that you can actually sell, they have been created in this country already. Now, only a very small fraction of those have actually been allocated to development so far. But there are 208 sites on the BNG register, apparently. So they were saying it is starting to work now. And one of the players in this market is Environment Bank, and they have got over 45 live BNG sites and another 25 in the pipeline. So, yeah, I mean, it is, as I said, it's early days, but it is getting started, and hopefully it will develop from here. Of course, it's not going to be for everybody, and it's not something that some farms and businesses will be able to do or even want to do. But you get your payment on the sale, so it is another form of income for farms, and we'll have to hope that it keeps working as it should.
And a blunt challenge from EFRA Committee Chairman Alistair Carmichael, Hugh, saying that this is not happening. How is Natural England going to get the money down to farmers in the field?
Yeah, it just comes back to the whole confusion around the policy, doesn't it? And like I say, the flip-flopping that's not there. They just need to... I mean, could we, for a second, hope that the 25-year farming plan, which we're promised to come out of DEFRA Towers later this year, may hold some answers? The land use consultation and the land use directive that came out at the end of last year is a sort of vague... It doesn't really lay anything down. It's a suggestion of where things may or may not be done. I think where you could do stuff, and we've started to see it happen, although it hasn't been fully rubber stamped, particularly the private investment. And we talked about it the other week, was the landscape scheme stuff. And we saw that Cotswold scheme that finally got off the ground. It's a big scheme. It's tens of millions of pounds. It does benefit farmers because it's going in directly. It brings farmers together as a group so they can interact, they can share ideas, develop how they do stuff. And the key thing is it supports them. They're still farming in that environment. And you've got this strategy around habitat and where you do your greening stuff. So you optimize your surface area and you get some proper bang for your buck over a whole landscape, as opposed to just saying, oh, let's rewild this 10,000 acres or rewild that 4,000 acres to open a blooming tea room, which is just nonsense. It's nice, but it's just tween nonsense. And it's just farming for the lazy. And it's just bonkers. So I think the opportunity is there. And to be fair to DEFRA, they have, we saw Emma Reynolds at the NFU conference, 30 million quid in that farmer collaboration fund there to start to bring those together. And I think they've also indicated, and it could be that, where is the missing 1.85 billion that Tom Bradshaw alluded to as well at that conference, which was in that support payment budget, which just seems to have disappeared. Is it waiting somewhere in the sidelines, some of it, to go into some of these landscape scale projects? And don't forget, you've also got going on, but they've got no money with them, attached to them, but they could have these local nature recovery strategies, these LNRSs, which are being drafted, they're being put together. Local authorities have to abide by them, recognise them within planning policy, etc., etc. But there's actually no clout to them. But they're, again, potentially powerful in the sense that you can deliver habitat and you can deliver food, but you have to get organised. And that requires, people like Natural England and DEFRA and everyone else to get off the backsides and start to bring a coherent long-term plan together that everyone understands and join in with private sector or whoever. But at the moment, it's just a lot of flip-flopping around.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
You're listening to the Farmers Weekly Podcast. Welcome along wherever you're listening to us from. You can email us podcast@fwi.co.uk. And if you're in the UK itself, you can message us by texting the word farm followed by a message to 88440. An email this week from Wyn Jones. Wyn has emailed in following our piece on the fertiliser and fuel situation last week. Wyn says, following the Middle East unrest, we'll see our cost base as farmers escalate. Everyone else is pricing their products to reflect their own situations, but we as food producers need to do the same. Beef prices are coming back. Same for milk. We cannot subsidise the food chain to the detriment of our own businesses. Fair play and transparency, says Wyn, need to be addressed at farm level now as a matter of urgency. Louise, what do you think to that?
I think I have to agree with quite a lot of what Wyn Jones says. And thank you for writing in and giving us your thoughts, Wyn. I mean, I have to say, being out and about this week, fertiliser prices it's a very, very hot topic. And I know it's something that we spent a lot of time talking about last week. But one of the things that I'm coming across is the dilemma that milling wheat growers have. They need to use extra nitrogen to get the grain protein that the millers want. Well, if they haven't got that nitrogen already on the farm, it's not really going to be worth them growing some of these crops for that milling premium. Now, obviously, if they're on a contract, they do have an obligation to supply the crop, so they are going to have to do it. And then hopefully in that situation, they've got all the nitrogen that they need. And, that's going to cost them £6 or £7 a tonne to get that protein when they're probably on a £20 per tonne premium. But, if you're on a £15 a tonne sort of minimum terms, you're probably going to be better to push that crop for yield rather than to go for the extra quality. So that is a dilemma, and that's quite a talking point as I go out and about at the moment.
Lots of talking points about fertiliser, Hugh. Some people with it on farm already and on farm indeed for a number of months, suggesting that they might be better off selling it back into the market rather than applying it to crops.
Yeah, no, it's a fairly true position, and they may well be doing that. And then, what do they do with their crops? I don't know. Just walk away from them or harvest them at organic levels, which would be an utter financial disaster. But yeah, no, they're right in what they're saying. And if they're in a position where they hadn't put any spring cropping in yet because it was too wet, but they had a load of fertiliser in the shed, they might indeed sell it. I think Wynn's absolutely right, and I think when he talks about transparency, and actually the key thing here is being grown up in the supply chain. And look, there are parts of the supply chain, I think, that are very grown up and work quite well, where there's aligned contracts, where there's communication between the end user right the way through the chain. There are equally parts of the supply chain, though, where it is total commodity, whether it's on the hoof or in the grain trailer, and neither party really communicates much. Neither really knows what each other wants. They just blindly produce, and then when it all goes wrong, blame everyone else. With that at the producer, at the processor end, or at the producer end. So there is so much need for far more joined up, I suppose, just better dialogue, because some of these supply chain, arrangements work really well. If we look at some of the aligned milk contracts and look at some of the, quite frankly, rubbish milk contracts, and you'll know who they are, and I can guarantee you that I could take any individual, whoever they were, if they'd never been to a farm before, we could drive round, we could go to one farm that's not very aligned, and we could go to another farm that is very aligned, and even they will be able to tell the difference in terms of the level of investment, what's happening on the farm, and all that sort of stuff. So there are possible solutions there. We just have to get more business-like as producers at making sure that we can take advantage of those. And actually, the more we take advantage of them and the more they work, you could argue, well, the more the supply chain would want to bring them to the fore and make more use of them. And particularly the retail end, people wanting consistent product with provenance. So we've just got to be a bit more grown up about how we go about marketing stuff and how we interact with that marketplace.
Indeed. And speaking of interacting with marketplaces, this week's commodity prices, Hugh, how are we interacting with those?
Thank you very much, Johann. Finished their deadweight this week, 636.2. That drops back. What's it going back? It's going back just over a penny on the week. The live weight's 367.3. That has gone up 0.2 of a penny. To the sheep rings, SQQ deadweight this week, 756.5. That goes up another 3p. Some really hot sheep prices. Someone was telling me earlier in the week about it was a Texel Cross ewe at Darlington, Cull ewe, £400. So the old festivals are coming up, and it's certainly driving the markets up. 385.5 is the live weight. That jumps up another 22 pence on the week. So some real fire in that sheep market at the moment. 184.6 is not a good price for pigs because it's dropped back nearly 2p on the week. A year ago, that was 203.8. Arable markets, despite all the craziness going on elsewhere in the world, all the volatility in energy markets, it does not bring much cheer, I'm afraid, to the arable markets. 163.9 is this week's spot on feed wheat. That's gone up a massive 20p. Milling wheat, 175 quid dead. That goes up a massive £2. Feed barley, 153.10. That's gone up a massive £2-ish on the week. Oilseed rape sees a rise of £2 exactly, 439.90. Feed peas, 205.80. That stands on. Feed beans, 206.60, goes up a massive 40p a tonne. Interestingly, that oilseed rape price, this will, you can't really be cheerful about much arable stuff at all at the moment, but a little bit of cheer. 439.90 is this week's spot price on the rape. A year ago, it was actually 396.50. So it has, well, in that particular instance, it's slightly better than it was last year. It's just a shame there's probably less oilseed rape being grown now this year, or in the store this year, than there was last year. Diesel price, bonkers money. We know it's been pinging all over the place. We know that you've been phoning up trying to get quotes, being told you'll have to pay whatever it comes on the day, and some people stringing out deliveries up to 14 working days for when people are ordering. Normally it's 3 or 4, but the Wednesday morning ring round went up to 108.69. Last week, the official figure was 98.35. We know some people have been quoted upwards of 135. Some talk of 115. It's quite a common number at the moment. But again, lots of volatility there. And it's hugely worrying. But those deliveries do seem to be getting through, even though people are waiting longer and obviously having to take the price on the day.
The Farmers Weekly Podcast. The Farmers Weekly Podcast.
And finally, Reform leader Nigel Farage has been on the campaign trail ahead of the local council and Welsh parliamentary elections, which are now less than 2 months away. Mr Farage is targeting the farming votes in the hope of making big political inroads, especially in Wales. During a visit to Basingstoke, Farmers Weekly's Phil Case asked him about Reform's farming policies, including whether he'd let cheap imports of chlorinated chicken into the UK.
If it's labelled properly, yes. But you've got to label stuff properly. And British farming and British produce and British food undersells itself. British products are premium products, produced under higher environmental standards, to a better quality and taste. Consumers choose. Look, if I want Sunday lunch, I can go to the local junk food shop, or I can choose to do something better. Of course, there is an issue on pricing. Mass-produced. People buy the cheapest food. They won't necessarily. If they were going to buy the cheapest food, they just live on junk food, and they'd all be 25 stone. All right, some people are, but not all are. This is about premium products and opportunities for export. The farming community have been stuck with exports to Europe because that's the way it worked for almost half a century. We've got great potential, particularly with high-quality meats around the rest of the world as well.
Do you think that the British consumer would buy the £6 British chicken or the £4.50 chlorinated US chicken?
They would buy... by the way, at the moment they're buying chickens from Thailand. Right now, they're buying chicken sandwiches here in Basingstoke that come from Thailand. So, come on. This is happening already, all right? It's happening already. When I go into a supermarket and I see a British chicken, a British free-range chicken, it's labelled anemically. There's nothing attractive about the way it's packaged and the way it's sold. I promise you I'm right. British agriculture is being undersold.
Mr Farage was also keen to highlight his farming credentials.
I mean, I've always been a country boy. I've always had a great feeling and affinity for people that farm, indeed people that fish as well. I'm a big supporter of the local hunts, trail hunts as they now are, about to be banned. I've spoken consistently about my worries about lead shot bans, categorisation changes on shotguns. So I've always had that sense that the reason the English countryside is so admired around the world is because of the families, by the way, both big and small, that in many cases have managed estates and managed land, or whatever size, for hundreds of years. So there's always been an affinity.
That's Nigel Farage talking to Farmers Weekly's Phil Case. You can see the full interview on the Farmers Weekly YouTube channel. We'll put a link to that on the show notes page of this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. Safe to say, some heated reaction to those comments on YouTube and indeed other social media platforms, especially, Louise, when it comes to chlorinated chicken. We're not in the business of platforming politics here on the podcast. Let's try and make sense, though, of what Nigel Farage is saying.
Well, he said two things, didn't he, about chlorinated chicken? He did say, you're right, it's never going to happen. But then he also said it would have to be labelled so that consumers knew what they were buying. So I thought there was a little bit of conflict in what he said there. The other things, he did say British products are premium products, and we produce high quality food, and that gives us opportunities for export, and gives us premium markets. So yeah, I mean, he was questioned quite hard on these trade deals and what they would mean, but he swerved a bit of that, really. He did, of course, emphasise food security, which, considering what's going on at the moment, he struck the right note on that one. But on chlorinated chicken, I was slightly confused by his answers, if I'm honest.
I mean, a lot of this stuff coming into the country, Hugh, it comes through in processed products, in pies and things like that. It's not easy, even if you label it, it's not easy to see what it is. But we know that consumers don't always buy premium products. Often they buy on price.
It's not often, it's pretty much most of the time, Johann. The vast majority of consumers are buying on price, whether that's individual private consumers or large procurers of large amounts of food for government contracts and other stuff like that. What I think strikes me with this, if you take the time, if you're having an anorak moment like me, and you go on the Google and you look up the Reform Welsh Manifesto, page 22 is the farming bit. And actually, if you read what they put in there, it is a pretty positive manifesto. Anyone in Wales who, I can't use the language on the podcast, but has been through the storm of Welsh rural policy of the last 10 years, this is suddenly uplands in what they've written here. Whether you're talking about TB and wildlife control and actually getting on top of that, whether you're talking around their support scheme, whether you're talking around connectivity, levy board becoming a farmer-owned co-op or sort of levy like shareholder-owned thing, right the way through to getting rid of the MVZs. I mean, they're all pretty big arse. They are. It's almost like a sort of NFU Cymru and Farmers Union of Wales shopping list. The really interesting thing for me for these elections will be the cut through. We know there'll be support for this in the rural constituencies of Wales, and we haven't fully seen all the other parties' manifestos yet ahead of this synod election. But it's how far they can cut through in the south. That is the political heartland of Wales. We know that. Will those constituencies who have voted Labour forever, since the party was formed, will they bring themselves to go from the left through the centre, past the nationalists? Some might say the nationalists, in some cases, are further left than Labour, across to reform, and that will be the big test here. But it's a very interesting thing, and as Nigel Farage said in his piece, this is a really interesting election for them, because if they can sell this not just to the rural communities of Wales, but if they can sell their vision to the rest of Wales, then that seriously ups them in terms of going into as we head towards the 2029 election.
Some might say, Louise, that competing against or offering an alternative to Welsh agricultural and rural policy, that's a pretty low bar. It is easy to say stuff in opposition, but it is far more difficult to deliver it when and if you actually win power.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's very easy to say what people want to hear when you're not in power. And farmers everywhere, not just in Wales, but in England and Scotland and Northern Ireland, they learnt a hard lesson, didn't they, before the current administration that we've got came in. We did believe what we were told, and then when they got into power, they did the absolute opposite. So, yeah, I think Nigel Farage does actually say, doesn't he, in the audio, that he sees these elections in May in Wales as a very good test bed for reforms policy and particularly for their rural policy. So, they're really they're gunning for it. And as Hugh said, there is a lot in that document, if you have the time to read it, that has got what people want to hear. Again, it can be different, can't it? Once, if they actually win some seats and they start to have a say in what's happening. So I was looking at and listening to what he had to say. And one of the comments that stood out to me was, we understand the countryside, we get it. Now, that's something we've heard from others in opposition in the last couple of years. So, we'll see how that goes on May the 7th for them.
Hugh, all politicians tailor what they say to the audience they're addressing, and Nigel Farage no exception, making the most of the opportunity to underline his farming credentials. We know he's fond of a flat cap and a wax jacket. I saw one comment on social media refer to him as a cosplay farmer, saying that he's a country boy at heart. Do we believe him?
Yeah, but it's like everything. Whatever audience they're in front of, they could be in front of the teaching union and go, well, my great aunt 6 times removed, she was a hardworking teacher. I know where you are. Keir Starmer talked about his first job being on a farm, yada, yada, yada. Yeah, they all have a wacky farming story, don't they? And it's exactly the same way some senior minister goes to a building site or to a JCB factory. They have to put on the hard hat and someone gives them the high-vis jacket. But yes, they all love to claim to be a farmer, and they all love to claim to have done something farmy at some point in their life. But I say it would be the same as if they were addressing the Airline Pilots Association. They would all claim to be related to an airline pilot or at some point work for a budget airline.
Well, we'll have to wait until May the 7th to find out whether Nigel Farage is flying high with the farming community. Those elections taking place on May the 7th in Wales and indeed many local authority areas too. That, though, is it for this episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast. We do hope you've enjoyed what you've heard. If you have, please, as always, do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And if you've really enjoyed what you've heard, please do leave us a 5-star review. We'll be back next week with all the latest news, views and analysis of all the big stories affecting UK agriculture. But for now, until next week, I'm Johann Tasker.
I'm Louise Impey.
And I'm Hugh Broom.
Thank you for listening. This episode of the Farmers Weekly podcast is brought to you in association with Bayer Crop Science.